I will add a disclaimer that all the footage you'll be seeing will be in the New Game Plus mode called Final Fantasy mode, which like I said is New Game Plus only, so I will be showing off basically a whole bunch of even late game skills and abilities. I won't showing story spoilers. Granted, these skills you'll be seeing is stuff that'll show off in trailers, but they stay as a spoiler, depending on you, so I guess viewer discretion is advised in that sense. Final Fantasy XVI is the 16th mainline entry to the Final Fantasy franchise. It is also the third mainline entry to be an action game, depending on whether or not you play Final Fantasy VII Remake as mainline or spin-off, to be honest. And also the third overall entry with include spin-offs to be rated M. So these are two things, not the first thing to do in a Final Fantasy franchise, but Square Enix marketing would claim otherwise. So the main premise that Final Fantasy 16 is set by Astia, with nations having mother crystals. Using part of the mother crystal allows you to use magic, but some people could do it naturally without the use of a crystal. Those people are referred to as bearers. But bearers are seen as less than human for their ability and are constantly enslaved. When they're enslaved, they get referred to as a branded and a tattoo mark on their face as a result. There are some people who can channel the power of the Eikons, which are essentially the summons with the Final Fantasy franchise, you know, your Ifrits, your Shivas, your Bahamut, Phoenix, etc. And dominants, depending on the nation, are either highly revealed for their ability, or are treated as enslaved in the same way as a bearer. Throughout the world, a blight is coming that is drying up all the world's natural resources, on top of also drawing out all the magic. So in the context of our hero Clive Rosfield, he at a young age ends up seeing his kingdom get attacked and destroyed, on top of his brother Joshua getting killed by a mysterious dominant. And so Clive's quest is to want to get revenge for his brother, but things do change later on, where the goal is set on more destroying the mother crystals, which he believes to be the source of the world's problems. Now, if anything I said sounds a bit complicated or a lot to take in, one of the basics from 16 does include is the active Time Lore ability, which will basically have a lore entry get updated in real time, even during cutscenes, which you can then check to reacquaint yourself with any updated information. And I have a gripe with this active Time Lore, which we'll get to later. One of my biggest gripes with Final Fantasy 16's narrative is that, despite the fact that its main story is about such a heavy subject matter of slavery, prejudice, and enslavement, it's also the fact that, at a certain point, like I mentioned, the main narrative, stops being about that and becomes about something else entirely, with instead the side quests being the things to build more upon the troubles of bearers and branded and the prejudice. But side quests are generally disliked in this game because gameplay-wise, there's not much to them and they're kind of uninteresting. So the fact that the big thing the game tried to hook you in and draw you in with ends up being fallen to the wayside in favor for a less interesting plot that honestly I have way more issues with the plot line instead chooses to pursue. One of my big gripe with this game is that Final Fantasy 16 has a problem of telling the player things and not actually showing them. Like, there is a early time skip of 13 years, and they will constantly have Clive, or another character, constantly tell you about, oh, those 13 years are real awful, but never actually show it to you at all, so them kind of emphasize how tragic the whole aspect was. Just feels hollow to me personally because we don't get to see any of it, and there's just several instances where things just kind of happen off screen and it's like they just talk about it instead. Hell, there's even characters that become more recurring side characters who have their introduction happen off screen, actually just a class specifically, happen off screen, and it feels like, why are we just cutting to this character whose parent was important, is important to Clive, but now the character's just introduced later, or characters who are very important to Clive that you think he would have sought out sooner, but instead doesn't seek out until the story requires his character's assistance for something, even though there's someone Clive really cares about. To even highlight more the telling and not showing aspect, there's actually a side quest in the game that talks about a major thing that when it comes to branded, and how it is actually possible to remove the branded mark, although there are risks involved. And this was just a side quest with no actual really visual to go with the whole entire process. And there was an update made to the game to actually include a, well, not quality, but low quality cutscene to go with it. And the reason that was added in is because the game's producer got questioned by one of their friends about the fact of, hey, this is an important moment and very important to your world and everything. Why aren't you showing it? And that's just a problem throughout the game, where just some things don't emphasize a lot, and it's like, you have shown nothing about this, so I don't really have much interest. Like, there are scenes that are really good and like very good acting, portraying everything, and then I'm like, this is the first time I'm seeing this character. Am I supposed to care? Now I'm talking about Greatwood to active time lore, a mechanic meant to assist players who may have trouble keeping track of everything that's going on in narrative Fantasy 16. But the problem is, they will use the active time lore to explain things the main story itself does not explain. Like, there are things in the game, even to very small things, like, oh, there's this star in the sky, Media, that the character Jill prays to. You need an active time lore in order to pretty much expand upon what is that thing, and this whole entire purpose of why there's this whole superstition about praying to it. And like small stuff like that, but then there are major things like the fact that the game will not even elaborate on what exactly the final boss is truly doing. Like, they'll tell you what their plan is, but like, what's the main detail of this plan? And it's, oh, see, the active time lore actually elaborates further on it. It's like, why is the final boss's motives and methods hidden behind the active time lore and not told in the main story? And I only found out about this recently, and I beat this game twice. It's just baffling that active time lore will sometimes just have information like this. It's like, should this be in the story? And it's like, no, it's a case of telling you things and not showing you what comes to the story, but then there's some things they won't even tell you. Like, you can go through the whole game without looking at the active time lore. This is true. It's not anything that's like, oh, the story will fall apart without knowing information. It's not like that. It's not like that kind of central. It's the fact that there's stuff that you probably should explain in your main narrative. And just also have the fact of, there's also a bunch of confusion that can happen from the player because some things are just not told to the player via the actual main narrative, and instead the active time lore is used as a crutch. And it just makes the story feel less thought out and planned, because active time lore feels like it's just there to explain things the writer may have forgotten to actually explain in the main narrative. There's to many people, and some find it weird, some understand what I mean, but my issue is that I don't find Clive Rosfield an interesting protagonist in the main narrative specifically. In the side quest, how he interacts with the side characters in their quests and storylines, I find more interesting than the actual way he interacts with characters in the main narrative. Because honestly, he just feels way too wooden in the main narrative. Feels like he doesn't have much to say, or he's just gonna repeat his points. There are some times where his more serious attitude does actually bounce off well with characters like Sid, but I also feel like Sid is a well-beloved character in this game solely because he's the snarky, jokey guy at times in a game filled with such wooden people in the main plot, so he kind of stands out as a result in that one entire aspect. But just Clive feels like he has more things to bounce off of when it comes to the side characters and their plight in the world of Valisthea, as opposed to the main plot where it feels like he doesn't really have much to say. And speaking of characters not having much to say, freaking Jill Warwick, who I know is a kind of divisive character, but I'm on the spectrum that I just don't like her, don't find it has much to really add to this game. Whether it be in terms of narrative, it's just the same thing of, hey, you have an interesting story with this character, but it's a case of telling you things and not showing you in multiple ways with Jill. And just like a whole entire problem where I feel there's much to her, she doesn't have much banter with Clive, despite the fact that they're like childhood friends and also love interest to each other. So there should be a lot more dynamic between them, but it feels like there's not a whole lot in there. And yes, there are side quests at the very end of the game to try and flesh out their relationship, but that's their end of the game. There's also the aspect that it just feels weird because, once again, they're supposed to be very important characters to each other, and I just don't feel much connection between them, aside from the game telling me that, oh, they care about each other a lot, and they're saying it, but not necessarily showing it. On top of the fact that, especially Jill, there are many moments where she could do things in the story to pretty much help the plot, and she does it, only for the game at times to say, oh, she actually did plenty of stuff off screen, you just don't get to see it. And it's like, it just makes me feel like Jill just doesn't add much to this whole entire game. It makes me feel like her being a dominant of Shiva just feels wasted as a result, to the point where I'm like, look how they massacred my girl Shiva. They attached her to Jill. It's just like one entire problem, which is a problem with several characters in this game. I feel like they're underutilized. But with Jill, because she's in the game a lot, it just feels worse than it feels like she's underutilized in the actual narrative. But then they'll tell you, oh no, she did stuff off screen. Can I see it? No. Or people will just, not people in the game, but fans will just make excuses of, well, it's obvious excuse why she didn't do X, Y, and Z. Okay, why? And there isn't an actual excuse. The writers just didn't want her to do certain things in the scene because they wanted to focus on other characters. But then you realize they gave Jill like very little focus on the entire game, despite her being in the game a lot. And it feels like, y'all just didn't write Jill at all. Another gripe that I have, in case you can't tell, the story of Fantasy XVI is the biggest gripe of the game. We haven't gotten to the gameplay yet. But another issue is the fact that there are points where you will do essentially filler side quests that are mandatory to the story, and it's just like, just feels weird to just halt pacing for, hey, go do this mundane activity for this character right now. Why? And like, I remember one instance where it's like, okay, this actually is setting up something for later. So it's like, okay, but it still feels weird how it's just basically, hey, go do a side quest for mandatory. To be like, no, it's not a side quest. It's a plot quest. It's like, no, it's not. That's the budget of one in the slightest, and it's clearly some of them don't even matter to the story. Like, these quests specifically feel more like, I'm just saying, they feel like an MMO. It feels like these are minute tasks given to the player in favor of having them establish a relationship with a character who will give them side quests. But because it's not an MMO single player game, it's feeling more like it's halting the game's whole entire progression for the sake of, hey, do this mundane task so you can do these side quests that you may not even do because of the fact of single player game. And this game has so many side quests, people get burnt out because of all the side quests. It just feels like a whole entire weird idea to do that kind of aspect of single player RPGs. Two side quests of Fantasy 16 that I see fans constantly mention to also highlight the dark storyline of this narrative is that there are two side quests that are right next to each other that deal with the plight of the branded. And people keep highlighting side quests because narrative-wise, they're actually really good. They're really good side quests. A lot of side quests in this game do have some good writing. It's just, you know, people don't want to do them because there's so many, and because the gameplay for them may not be up to par. But my issue is that, one, these two side quests people love to highlight are right next to each other, so of course we're going to talk about them, they're in close proximity to each other. And two, these side quests are at the tail end of when the game focuses, I mean the main narrative, is focusing on the plight of the bearers. So soon after this, the whole entire plight of the bearers will become a side quest only thing. So it kind of becomes an issue where the two best things people highlight of the game's whole entire issue and topic are when the game is about to stop focusing on that, and instead focus more on the story of the Mother Crystals, focus more on the Blight and everything. So it ends up basically just being these two outliers people love to mention to highlight, look at how mature Fantasy 16 is, and then it's like, okay, we're done with that, throw it out there, and then just kind of throw it all away and just focus on something else, which just bugs the hell out of me. Like, one of the things I know why they do in the story is that there's a point where Clive no longer has the Brennan mark on his face. I know they do it so that way he can interact with more characters and get more things done, as opposed to constantly being stopped, treated as lesser, and basically not being taken seriously because, oh, you're a filthy branded, you're a slave. But because they removed that Brennan mark from his face, it also means the story doesn't have to actually focus on the actual plight of the branded as a result. So because of that, the story stops doing it entirely until it's doing the side quests. The side quests will still focus on the plight of the branded, but the main quest basically doesn't have to talk about the issue anymore, which feels so weird that it's like, oh, this is a mature game, yeah, it's about slavery, it's about prejudice, and then the game just kind of drops it for the main story and focuses more on the issue of the blight. Even the game's tagline on the PS5 menu highlights legacy of the crystals that shaped their history for too long. And it's pretty much the whole entire aspect of highlighting the fact that this is what the game's main focus wants to be and not the actual plight of the bearers, dominance, branded, and what's going on in the story. Also, you still ain't the first to do that one either from Fantasy XVI. Now, we get to the gameplay. And the gameplay, like I said before at the beginning, is an action RPG. As many people love to cite, the comic director for this game being one who previously worked with the Devil May Cry franchise, and you can feel the influence with it. Although, I don't want to compare it directly to Devil May Cry, because if I do, Final Fantasy XVI looks lesser as a result. But the main gameplay is that, so Clive has the ability to absorb the power of other Eikons. So he gets more abilities in combat that he can do, which is super cool that they can do that, adds more variety. The problem is, the game waits a long time before actually giving you more Eikons to work with, and when it comes to the special ability of the Eikons, there's generally not much to them. Like, oh, look at the part of Phoenix, he can teleport. Okay, it's teleport where you have a lot of recovery from it, you can't attack out of it, but it just feels like there's not a whole lot to it. Or like Garuda, which has the ability of, oh, it can pull small enemies, but it's a big enemy, and instead will just do this awkward spin attack instead. It just feels not that really fleshed out. Although an enemy has their stagger bar gets half depleted, you can use Garuda to temporarily stun them, which just feels like something he should be able to do naturally rather than being associated to Garuda. It makes it feel like, oh, I gotta keep Garuda at all times because of the whole entire stun aspect. But just feels weird how some of the icon abilities don't feel like they have a lot to them. And when I compare on Devil May Cry, it's like, okay, Phoenix is basically the Trickster ability from Devil May Cry, being able to use Trick to teleport, but where Trickster has more going on with it, Phoenix just has Phoenix Shift and just the one thing. That's why I said I don't want to compare Devil May Cry, because it just makes Final Fantasy 16 look worse. Oh, Garuda is basically freaking Nero's Devilbringer, being able to use Snatch. But where Snatch can pull small enemies and also pull Nero to large enemies if they're large, is you just have this awkward spin attack with Garuda, which just feels more awkward than anything. I don't really use it much because, like, what do you use this for? On top of the fact that, you know, Devilbringer is still a grab, Devil May Cry, so it's also associated with doing powerful grab attacks on enemies, which again, you don't have in this game. Hence why the comparisons just make Final Fantasy 16 look worse as a result. Anywho, with Eikons you get special skills you can use, and you can equip 2 skills per Eikon slot, and you can also mix and match some. You don't have to you don't need to have Phoenix as the main thing in order to use Phoenix skills, which is super cool. That's to customize mix and match abilities to your heart's content and all that. But with the game's combat works, one of the issues I have is the fact that despite all the Eikons being based off the elemental summons of the Final Fantasy franchise, they don't really use any elemental aspects when it comes to how the combat works. There's no elemental weaknesses. It also means you can do blasphemous things like using fire on the bomb enemies to kill it because, well, they don't want to worry about elemental weaknesses or the whole entire aspect where using fire on a bomb will make it explode. So stuff like that just gets thrown to the wayside. And not even Stranger of Paradise had the balls to just blast me with the bomb. So it's like a whole entire aspect where it's more about some skills are better at putting HP, some are better at putting stagger meter. But the problem is, the combat is that, well, especially when it comes to boss fights, because bosses take more damage with stagger, you of course want to deplete their stagger, just use the stagger skills first, rather than using anything that depletes HP, because it'll deal less damage. Then you want to use your HP skills, it feels like a rinse and repeat method that just feels uninteresting. Once again, to compare to other stagger-based games, at least for something like Final Fantasy 13, your skills, stagger magic, can also be used for elemental weaknesses, can be used for things, enemy. Final Fantasy 7 Remake and Rebirth, magic can be used to also stun and pressure enemies as well, to get more out of it, rather than wait for stagger state, which is super cool. Retro Paradise. The stagger meter is also effectively a second health bar. Deploying that thing can pretty much transition to the next phase or end the fight, give you more than one waste with a battle. But here, it's just right to stagger, do your real damage, rinse and repeat. Especially since bosses in this game, or big enemies, don't take any actual stun from your hits unless the enemy is staggered, in which case they're temporarily stunned. So it's a whole entire issue which just feels more tedious as a result, because I feel like I'm just going through the motions of everything and not really doing a whole lot. I was about to mention that all your abilities are on cooldowns, and everything's on cooldown. Clive can't do much because he only has one basic combo. Only one in your freaking action RPG. There's more combo variety, Infinite, Devil May Cry, Star Blade, Metal Gear Rising. Freaking why only one basic combo for Clive when his abilities are on cooldown? Like, why would you do that? It also means it sucks early game when you don't have many abilities. And then by end game, you have too many abilities that you can't even equip all of them, couldn't equip 2 per icon slot. We want a total of about 6. Weird decisions in your action RPG, I don't get it. So that's what my gripes with combat. Combat is fun. Mix and match your skills is fun. Fighting enemies is fun, but there is a reason why whenever someone wants to highlight the biggest aspects of this combat, they are doing it on regular enemies rather than the actual big enemies or bosses, because and they want to use enemies they can clearly juggle in order to even stun and do this, but they can't do that on bosses because bosses won't let you do that because you don't really stun them unless you're staggered. It's like my whole entire gripe with combat being that it's fun. It's good, but it could be better. And when you keep trying to bring up on my face, come to Zen, Devil May Cry, come to Zen, Devil May Cry, then I'm gonna be like, okay, we're going to Devil May Cry, great, Devil May Cry does it better in every way. Is that the currency you wanted? It probably wasn't, but just like other games have also done better as well, and this one aspect comes to spin-offs as well. So it just feels weird to want to highlight this is the first real action game. I think Returns did action combat better than this. Sure, this combat is better from Final Fantasy XV's combat, but like, that's not a high bar to achieve. But playing as Clive is just one part of the gameplay. There's also the icon fights where you take control of Ifrit. And Ifrit does less than Clive does in combat. Clearly these icon fights are more about spectacle, because all I remember seeing about the icon fights is people say is they look cool. But yeah, they're designed to look cool, it's not to be a spectacle. But gameplay wise, it should be the big moments, the big selling point feature from Final Fantasy XVI, and they're good. It's the fact that's like, I wish there could be more done with these icon fights. Like, the other icon abilities you get never factor into these fights at all. It's like a whole entire weird aspect to pretty much include with this whole entire thing of, getting more icons makes the power of E3 stronger. Is the game telling you that, and not exactly showing you that? It's just like one of my gripes when it comes to icon battles, but they're fun, they're entertaining, they look cool, but it's just spectacle over actual substance, really. And it's just wish they'd done more with it, but this is the big selling point. And, you know, the big thing that's like, this will need the power of PS5 in order to do these big icon fights. And yeah, I can see, like, hardware-wise, you need the hardware in order to do these fights, but then you don't do much as a game. And it's like, man, less games before this, less technology have done more with their gameplay, man. Like, come on! I mentioned a lot of the side quests, but there are also hunts, where you can find specific monsters that essentially act as their own boss fights throughout the world that you want to hunt because you need to take them down because they're causing problems to the environment and towns. The problem I have with this is the fact that is the issue of locating them. You get a general area where they'll be, and despite the fact that these are supposed to be monsters that are terrorizing towns, which is why you would want you to eliminate them, the townspeople never actually talk about them or even point you in the right direction. So you're basically just running around trying to look for it, or just using a guide to find a friendly location. It just feels like one entire weird aspect where it's like, is this supposed to be big things terrorizing towns and everything? And there are some side quests that will task you with going after hunts, and they still won't even tell you where the monster's at. It's like, why is locating the thing that apparently should be this big thing they should be able to notice because of how it's terrorizing the towns, somehow no one cares? It's just like this whole entire weird aspect of the hunts where it's like locating it is pretty much a bigger struggle in the actual fights they present. Outside of the fact that the hunts generally don't really add much to the game, like, it just kind of feels like you're fighting more souped up monsters at times that you already fought before in the main story. So that really don't really feel unique a lot of times, but they're a thing to do, I guess. They're a thing to do. Now, despite Clive being the only playable character you have, you do occasionally get party members that don't add much at all to the actual combat. Like I mentioned, you have Jill, who just says help you. Sid also occasionally helps you. Torgal is there for most of the time, and you can actually command Torgal in combat, but these characters do so little to actually assist you in fights, especially boss battles where you'll just notice your party members just doing absolutely nothing for a lot of fights. Or there's Torgal, like I say, you can command, but Torgal is more of a mechanic to help you with freaking juggling enemies, small enemies and everything in one aspect, because of the damage, Torgal doesn't do much actual damage, even with the whole entire ability to tell him what to do. So it just feels like party members basically don't serve a point when it comes to actual combat of this game. And they're there for the narrative, you know, they're there, but once again, I wish they had more. As a result, then okay, I wish they had more to say and banter with when it comes to Clive. Like, Joe doesn't really banter much. Sid does have fair enough. The other characters that joins you, they also have fair enough banter as well. It's just Joe doesn't say much, which is weird because again, game wants to emphasize the relationship, won't actually show it. But I just feel like combat-wise, because the more I've seen some people say, "Oh, a Fantasy 16 was a turn-based game, and those characters will have gotten more." No, not necessarily, no, like, so some turn-based games don't do much with side characters either as well, and there are some turn-based games that rely on maybe having, like, a few human characters, not actually, well, hell, Pokemon's a big RPG series, and your party is Pokemon who don't speak to the player, so, no, turn-based RPG doesn't necessarily mean that the character would have had more going on narrative-wise. This is just the game's choice to focus on other characters and everything. When it comes to what exploring the world, there are things to find, like special treasure chests that belong to the Fallen, which has to do with the whole entire aspect of narrative. There are places that are putting out side quests, too many of them in fact, but I don't think we should go back and forth between places. But, like I said, one of the issues is the fact that there's just not much to find. It's also one of those games where NPCs, while they will talk about aspects of the world, they don't really say anything really important. It's the active time lore will reveal stuff the game's not telling you. Having the NPC chatter feels the most redundant. It feels like they're just there just to have them, and don't really have much to don't have anything to really add. It just feels weird how on the power of the PS5, and we still have these NPCs that don't have much to really say. Meanwhile, I can look at like something like Final Fantasy 1, where NPCs had more to say, more things to direct you, more things to add to the world. And it's like, power of technology, and I feel like we're really using it outside of, like I said, the spectacle of the icon battles in the game. Speaking of spectacle, probably already seen from the footage for the boss fights, but there are QTEs in the game. They're generally very simple. Either just hit the attack button when appropriate, dodge button when appropriate, or mash the attack button. And there's not much to them. They're clearly their cinematic flair. On top of the fact that the game really tells you on screen that it's cinematic attack, cinematic evasion, and it's sprinkled throughout the entire game. The problem is that in the game, you can replay story segments, boss fights, everything, which is super cool and neat, but it also includes every single cutscene in the fight, because they're all treated as essentially gameplay as part of the fight, even if they don't really add much of anything, and it's just like a small cutscene. So the way the fight played out originally in the story will be how the fight plays out when you redo it, which means just a whole lot of punch just for waiting for the next segment. So wish they did include that when it came to the replay segment. There's also the fact that after the game, you clearly gain points everything trying to score you, but in terms of the story, these scores don't matter. It only matters when you're doing the replay, because that's when you actually get ranked everything when it comes to how you actually do. So the fact that the game decides to put this throughout the main story is just clutter on the screen. Also, because I gotta bring it up, let's talk about the game's text. You can, the options, increase the text size for your subtitles, which is very much appreciated. You can make them big, and they have backgrounds to make it easier to read. I greatly appreciate that. The issue is, that's the only text size you can increase. Everything else is still minuscule, including even subtitle chat for the NPCs. On top of also the menu you have, which cycles around Clive's body when you pause the game, is also not well laid out. It feels just inconsistent and slapped together. So that could have been better. But the fact that I wish it could expand more text bigger, since a lot of text is still small, including even the main menu text is tiny and can be obscured on the main menu because the visual effects going on behind the text. So it's not about the subtitles, but not anything else when it came to how the text is formatted, and I wish that applied to everything else, you know. So 1 step forward, 5 steps back. Well, 5 steps back with a backflip. I've seen many try to say that Final Fantasy 16 isn't a real Final Fantasy game, which is complete BS. That's so much stuff the Final Fantasy staple. We got Dragoons, with the magic, got the summons, and everything. I don't get people try to say it's not a Final Fantasy game. I know they probably mean like, oh, because it's an action RPG, but letting return to action RPG, Final Fantasy 15 to action RPG, like, come on here. Like, we've had a lot of stuff, aspects that make Final Fantasy, so I don't get the complaint. We even got Chocobos, and the Chocobo theme. I said new edition Chocobo theme. This game has a Chocobo theme. The excuse given by the devs is that they felt like with the visual style from 16, having a more whimsical Chocobo theme would essentially feel out of place with the game's story and tone. And I feel like if the game was more a pixel game, it could get away with such jarring tonal shift. To which I say, wow. It's amazing Final Fantasy 16 was apparently composed with no composer. The composer came with a Chocobo theme. We've had many renditions of Chocobo theme in wildly different styles. So the idea you're trying to say that now you apparently can't make a Chocobo theme to fit this game's world is insane to me. Especially when some of the music does not fit Final Fantasy 16 at all, but they're in the style they are because the references to some of the boss fights from Final Fantasy 14, since Soken also composed Final Fantasy 14. And that's just insane to me that you will make the excuse of adding in radically unfitting music for certain segments because, oh, Final Fantasy 14. But when it comes to the Chocobo theme, you won't even try. Like, I'm surprised you even made a rendition of Battle on the Big Bridge, Final Fantasy 5, for the FF14 Gilgamesh fight, because apparently that would be radically too different for you with Final Fantasy 14's lore and everything. What the hell? If I made Chocobo themes with the entire franchise in radically different styles, the idea that you suddenly can't compose a Chocobo theme to fit Final Fantasy 16's world just shows to me that, damn, I guess Final Fantasy 16 just has no composer. A little bit about the story that I can mention here is the fact that, despite how important the icons and dominance in this game are, Leviathan is nowhere to be seen. They'll just mention Leviathan the Lost, but don't really explain anything about what happened to Leviathan. Why is it lost? It should be included here considering all the icons are important. But Leviathan is just not really mentioned. But don't worry, they got you back. To see for an extra $19.99, you can actually find out what happened. Eikons made a DLC. Something that should have been the main game was made to DLC. There's some Final Fantasy 15 DLC looking ass, I swear. Where it feels like something that should have been there ends up being main DLC. And I know the devs mentioned that they had no plans for DLC, but the fact that you mention Leviathan, the fact that you highlight the importance of the icons, and then just mention one several times, but then just give nothing to it or any explanation, yeah, no, bullshit. You either had development issues with developing the game and could include it, or you decided it'd be DLC if they ever decided to do DLC. Like, this is some bullshit here. Overall, Final Fantasy 16 is a good game. Despite my big rant of the narrative, how much I don't enjoy it, it is still a good game. Its gameplay is fun, side quests can be interesting stories, Clive can be interesting protagonists when talking to side characters, so this is still a good entry in Final Fantasy. I just feel the potential could have been a lot more, especially the story didn't do so much telling instead of showing. And I didn't get to it because I don't want to talk about kind of spoiler stuff, but I also feel like it probably has the most boring and uninteresting final villain of a Final Fantasy game. But overall, it is a good game. I just wish it could have been much more. And I've been playing this game on Final Fantasy mode, so people say, oh, Final Fantasy mode highlights more this whole entire gameplay aspect and makes things better. But no, Final Fantasy mode is just basically the same thing as the main game that you already did in the main playthrough. Just now, enemies deal more damage, Clive deals less damage, and just the enemies don't really react much to what Clive is doing. So despite how good it is to feel as playing as Clive in combat, the enemies just don't feel built around it. It's just the epitome of having good combat, but the enemies themselves don't really do much to really elevate it. You know, you need good enemies to really elevate a good combat system, but don't really have that in this game, sadly. Except for boss fights, which are enjoyable, but I wish they also had more to them, because, again, other Final Fantasy games, like Stranger of Paradise, just blows this game out of the water when it comes to combat. But it's a good game, and people try to say it's not a Final Fantasy game. No, it's a Final Fantasy game. Don't be like that. Good game, and I'm also so glad that Clive went to Tekken. Also taking a video, you haven't seen that, because that's fun. And also, get FF7 fans. Also, I gotta say about Final Fantasy 16 and one aspect. It's a good game, still recommend it entirely. I just wish it could have done better.